Welcome back to Succession Stories. I am thrilled to be with my guest today. He's got over 3 decades of advisory experience working with executives to help them be better. And he's a pioneer in process consulting. He's guided leaders and organizations through complex transitions, which of course is a favorite topic on this show. And he takes his approach very eloquently to his book. And he has written a book, which I have right here, a picture of right here. If you're looking on our YouTube channel, here it is. Listening, Helping, Learning, and the core competencies of process consulting. He's the founder of Design Group International, excuse me, sorry, my camera's in the way. Society for Process Consulting and Maestro level leaders. Welcome to the show, Mark Vincent. Mark, welcome. So glad to have you here.
Thank you, and congratulations on seeing 5 years of a podcast. That's an accomplishment.
Oh, thank you. I know that you had a show and you ran your podcast for 3 years, so you can appreciate what it's like to be on this side of the mic. And I'm grateful to be with you. We were introduced by a guest that was on our show recently, and he recommended you because he thought we would have lots to talk about, and I know we will. I want to start with your succession story. There's a really interesting transition that you had in your experience. Tell me about that.
Well, there'd probably be two parts in it because my first wife, Laurie, and I founded Design Group International, and we were business partners. Grew that up. Laurie became ill early in that process and died in 2015. And at her passing, we were so thankful that we had put some continuity plans in place and succession plans in place for each person because you're in pain, you're grieving, and then you have an opportunity to go to the little playbook you created because you can't even think. So you just start following the script and the plans that you had laid out. And she served as the company CFO. So being able to see that change happen as smoothly as it could was a real relief. Beyond that, then just up to 20, I gotta get my years right, 2018, then we named a couple of successors for me. We kind of blew up the CEO role, and I moved up to chair the partnership of our firm, and we named a successor for Design Group International, and then a CEO for the Society for Process Consulting, which was this training arm that we had created. And then I could chair the partnership. So this often happens in succession, right? It's not just you step out, someone steps in. If you've grown up a company, there are multiple roles that will probably be divvied up. And that's what we did. And here just a year and a half ago, then I was actually able to sell my shares and move on to where I'm just doing pure executive advising as I might call me a private citizen now, but to see a company from founding all the way through to succession and a second generation of leaders. That's a heady journey, a great journey, a painful journey. You're going to suffer and you're going to have a lot of joy. It all kind of comes together. But that'd be the brief outline for me.
Yeah, the contingency plan that you mentioned, was that created once Lori found out she was ill, or was it already in place before that?
Yeah, well, it was in place before. She had been ill for a long time, but it wasn't. They weren't tied together. Design Group International is an organizational development group. They would call themselves a community of practice. Well, what's their practice? Best practices and going beyond them. And so when you're helping organizations develop and you're helping them get key man insurance or key person insurance, and you're helping them think through contingency and you're doing succession planning with others, and you don't eat your own cooking, kind of lose integrity. And so, as we got to a point that we had multiple partners and we had multiple income streams, about 7, 8 years in, and it's starting to run really well, we began to do that planning so that we could say, look, we're doing what we help you do.
And you were working with privately held companies to help them with general business practices, or was it specific to business transition at that point?
Some of our projects were business transition, but the way Design Group International was set up was process consulting community of practice. So instead of saying, well, here's what we sell, we could say, well, here's some expertise that some of our principals have, but let's talk about you. What are you facing? What do you need? Where are you in relationship to where you want to go? Who's going to do something about that? What does success look like? And so you're iterating what the client wants. And then sometimes, oh, we have some ways that we could help. And just as often, you're saying, well, let us connect you to someone who really knows this, who would come in as a subject matter expert, because we're not starting from that basis. We're starting from the fact that we probably don't know the solution and you don't. So let's dig in and figure it out. And that was the distinctive approach that we took.
Gotcha. And you wrote a book about it. You wrote a book about process consulting, and it's sort of forming the basis of your practice today, I presume.
It is.
What, in your own words, I know you just did a nice description of that service. Does that feed into my question, which is what is process consulting?
Yeah, it does. And process consulting is starting from we're going to figure it out rather than we already know the answer. If you already know the answer, then why do you need consulting? And if the consultant knows the answer, then they're really functioning as a contractor or a subject matter expert. But when you have to figure it out together, you're going to examine and you're going to start listening to the problem together and figure out what's the next step and what emerges. So why not start there? And in that process, you're forming a relationship, you're thinking alongside. Trusted advisory really grows out of that quickly because you're scratching your head with them and you're figuring out next steps and you're adapting. This method was really first fully described by Edgar Schein. A lot of people who have MBAs read at least one of his books in graduate school. Process consulting or humble consulting or helping or one of his many books full of case studies about using this iterative approach, asking questions so that people have to declare what they know. And as I spent some time looking at, like your Sherpa framework, that's exactly what you're doing. You're laying out a framework like a scaffolding that you know is going to have to be satisfied, but you're not supplying the answers. You can point to 100 different ways, and they've got to declare themselves and they got to own their answers, or they're not going to do it. They're not going to execute. And that's what process consulting calls out. It's like I'm not asking you to abandon what you know, right? And so I get deeply curious for your own experience how iteration helps you as opposed to just being the paid knower in the room.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about our listeners and people who are listening to the show own businesses. They might have a transition in the future to sell or to pass to family, etc. And many people wonder about these big questions. And what I often say is that I don't have the answers. I have a framework, and as you pointed out, the Sherpa framework is essentially, six building blocks that we can use and leverage to build the framework of the house. We're going to construct the house, and maybe we need some special fine tuning, and we're going to bring in a specialist for tax, or we're going to bring in a specialist that's a corporate attorney.
Right.
But essentially we have a framework of things that we're going to work on together, and we have our toolbox. So I don't have all the answers, but I have a pathway there. I'm going to guide you through that process. That's what I find, Mark, is most appreciated, I think, by folks who are looking to answer these questions and find clarity. I can't possibly have all the answers, and nor should they expect me to. And if I said that I did, I'd feel like a charlatan, trying to sell snake oil in the 1920s.
Right.
It's just not realistic. And one sole source of the information is not really reasonable. However, for folks like you and me that have seen enough in the market, there's pattern matching. We can spot the pitfalls. We can give spotlight to strengths and areas to double down on. And I think that's why businesses hire executive advisors like you, hopefully like me, to say, all right, they're going to help guide me on this process because I can't do it myself, and they're going to help point the way. That's what I
Yeah.
find.
Yeah. If you're in that role and you're head down in the business, or you've even advanced it to where you're actually working on the business, it's a full time gig. And so to have all of the acumen for managing a transition, which most people are going to do one time in their life, they're not going to know it already. Well, I also don't know it already because they have, if they've been successful, they've differentiated themselves in the marketplace. They have a unique context, unique product or service offering, unique team, unique moment in their business development. Their, as you work at their personal values, what they want to achieve in their life, it's going to be different from person to person. You already have a unique formula in that moment. So what we can do is say, well, here's the ingredients, here's the spice rack, here's the dishes. What do you want to cook up here in a way that would satisfy you? And now let's start creating together. If I could offer one illustration I really like to use. When I start working with a client, I'm like across the table from them and I'm listening, not telling them. I'm listening and drawing out and saying, is this what you mean? Is what do you mean by that word? Or tell me more about this. And the picture starts to emerge. And when I start to play it back, there's this wonderful thing that happens. We stop sitting across the table from each other. We are now side by side, like you turn side by side, and we're listening to the opportunity that's in front of them. And we're engaging with it. So it's not, I'm telling you what I know and you're arguing with me. We're now arguing with what we want to do with this thing that's taking shape in front of us. And when it becomes joint listening to that, real help can emerge that is co-created. It's not a prognosis and diagnostics and here's my prescription for you, but it is a mutually rendered set of steps that we can then look at with each one and say, what do we have here? What is emerging? What do we see? Is there any adjustment that we need to make? Take the next step. I think that's what the Sherpa framework offers. As I spent a little bit of time with it, you've laid out a set of steps without providing the answers, but you can see things emerging as you work through them.
Well, thank you for making the time to do that, and thank you for bringing it up in this conversation. I really appreciate that. I think it'll play well in our next piece of this conversation, which is how do you work with clients who are struggling with some of these big challenges for transition and legacy building, and how does your process help them work through some of these big questions?
That's such a good question because I do sense a bit of a differentiation between a lot of other suppliers that are out there, and I don't see other people working at transition consulting as competition. I think your competition is chaos. It is loss of value. It's unfettered egos that aren't under control and lack of personal discipline and human development that ruins the estates that people are accumulating. It makes it hard for employees to continue to have a job. That's what we're battling, so that there is a future of work and a future of dignity in work. So, with that in mind, what I want to do, and I find that a lot of other providers aren't doing this yet, and I hope more will, is I'm really listening to the distinctives of that business owner or principal in the business. They have a way that they learn. They have a way that they process information. They have a way that they work. There's a speed at which they do things. And then you start going from that person to their context, who they're working with. I want to map onto that in addition to mapping onto their business processes and their capital structure and their personal dreams, because they're going to go on a journey of transformational change. There's no way around it. They're going from the life they're in to a life that they want to go to. And if they haven't even begun to think about that, they're not ready yet. And these are all things that you know, and many people who are listening know. But we start to really plunge into the work a little bit too quickly sometimes, I'm thinking, where we don't really know how this person processes information, which is yet one more dimension of pitfalls or ways that things could get interrupted that have nothing to do with the scaffolding of a structure and a set of dates and a set of steps. So I really want to tune into that so that I am a thought partner with them. And then we start working at the frameworks. And then we can, where I can stay watching them. So I don't want to be the provider of estate planning or the business valuator or the investment banker. I've got networks for that. I'm glad to know you and what you're doing so that I can, make recommendations in the future. Where I want to sit is beside that person where I'm watching them as they're going through that process and I can have those little aside conversations and be able to ask, how are you feeling? What are you doing? What do you need? Do you need more time? Just to draw them out. And it's such a rich resource for how you can approach this when you really are watching the people involved.
There's an emotional intelligence that's known as the, I guess, EQ or
Mhm.
EI in some circles, and that plays into how you're building relationships. Are you also encouraging these leaders to dial in to their own emotional intelligence with their teams?
Yes. There's two dimensions to that. One is their development of emotional intelligence and being aware and cultivating their awareness. And I could talk specifics about how we do that. The other thing is that you're going to have to develop leaders who are stepping in behind the leaders that are exiting. If it's a merger acquisition, what's the team that's going to take it from here? And if they don't do that work, the value everybody's signed up for is going to disappear right away, because you don't have a sticky platform, and you don't have tenure built in and that kind of thing. But what we want on the leadership development side is to look at where we want them to go and where that person wants to go, because that also is a partnership, and develop their learning plan. And there are some assessments I like to use that are not just quantitative, like here's your number, here's your color, here's your set of initials. It is much more around that person qualitatively identifying where they are in relationship to where they want to go, so you can talk about it with them in their own words and with their own stories, that starts to set that course of motion. So let me say it this way: a lot of leaders, if they've been successful and they develop their character, they've knocked off some of the great big barnacles on their ship. They know to tell the truth, they know not to mistreat others, and we hope that that's where people are arriving. But at that point, there's some fine etching, some fine sculpting that needs to be done. That how do you get 1% better? Well, it's helpful if they are in the a partner in identifying what 1% better looks like. So I want to bring that along with the more generic, let's cultivate our emotional intelligence together.
That's great. Is there a particular client case study that stands out to you where they were kind of starting at the bottom and had particular challenges, maybe couldn't even articulate what success looked like? They had to get out of the valley to get to the mountaintop. Is there any Are there any particular stories that stand out to you that you could share?
There are a number of them. Probably what's in my mind at the moment is the freshest one, because I was doing some work with them this week. And I want to be careful, of course, that I don't deliver any confidential detail. But in this case, it was an organization that really was seeing itself as very successful. It had a great run. I mean, just a really great run, a lot of growth. Succession starts to set in for their very qualified, very experienced, very accomplished leader who wants a planful approach. He's not doing anything abrupt. He's really wanting to do this well, land the ship well. He joins a cohort that I lead. We're working at it. And as he starts to lay out how he wants to do it, it suddenly becomes clear that they had not developed any bench, that they had not really planned for the continuity of senior leaders, and his team, with such a strong culture across 15 years, were all going to pretty much retire within 24 months of each other. That is a huge loss of intellectual capital, relationship capital, process improvements that had been worked through and battled through. So much is just going to disappear. And so their definition of successful transition just multiplied, sixfold. And how do we do that? And it becomes a major issue. And then they have a board that starts to get drawn in, and they realize, wait a minute, we have more than half of our board that's going to transition off at the same time. So the whole top of the organization is like a mountain with the top lopped off. How do you ensure that, so you've got continuity, and if you're going to have successors, that they're not hampered, that you don't go into a malaise? And so they began to really develop a framework and a very intentional way of processing these things. They created an internal cohort of leaders to meet monthly, to talk not just about the process of change, but what they're experiencing, what their own journey is, creating vulnerability with each other, and beginning to work with those that they identified as potential successors and creating roadmaps for them. They really spun up almost like a war room for this to get it done, because it became so much more intense than they imagined. But if there had not been a desire for planful succession in the first place, they never would have uncovered it. It would have been slowly revealed that you had this giant leak at the top of the org. And I think they're going to come through this with shining colors. But it required this very intensive effort, and they were up for it.
And this was leadership succession
Complete leadership success. It's the whole senior team in this case,
and the board too.
and the board as well. It's like if you say the top of the iceberg in a sense, that's where it's going. I often like to use organizational development language that you're not at the top of the organization if you're in the C-suite. You're at the bottom of the organization supporting the whole thing. It's not Icarus flying to the sun and having his wings melt It is being Atlas at the bottom of the thing holding up the earth. That's what you're doing when you're at the top or at the support level of the whole organization. And that was just about to disappear. And people would step into those roles if they didn't do this work, ready to help, but not understanding what the role required and having no experience and no access to those that went before. And that's what they saw with about 24 months notice and spun it up to really address it. One of the cool things that's emerging for them now is, wait a minute, HR and other senior leaders, we don't want to face this as an organization 10 years from now with the next team that's coming in. So we now want to see an intentional development of a bench of leaders and an ongoing development plan for anybody that we think really has a future with this organization. Let's get busy about having that as a standard practice, not just when it's like, oh, we've got to do something about it.
You mentioned the governance and board, so I think that's a good segue because I wanted to talk about the role of governance when it comes to transition and succession planning. I know you serve on some boards, and are those multi-generational companies, privately held companies?
I serve on some of those, a couple of those, and I also am on a large NGO board.
So for the privately held companies, I have experience with some second gen as an advisory board member, and succession is a topic, right? And it should be always discussed and proactive, and for fiduciary boards especially because their role is to always,
Yeah.
be mindful of what does the succession plan look like for the CEO. I think it's also interesting at some point there could be conversations about succession of ownership. Have you used this process to help the board and or the management team or the owner, if it's kind of the one-to-one conversation, think through, well, who should own their business after them?
Yes, and it's a similar way of working. Like, well, what's the current situation and where ultimately kind of is the blue sky place you'd like to land, and how do we start mapping a process from here to there? It's a very effective way of working because you're keeping this really a soft process with the people, and you're being really quite firm with the actual process and the scaffolding that helps produce some answers. It's been very effective along the way.
There's quite a number of folks in my circle, and I think in your circle, who are members of peer groups. And these are
Yes.
organizations typically for large, well established companies. So let's say YPO as an example, YPO Gold, or whatever the new name is. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Vistage. I'm a
Yeah.
member of Vistage, proud member of Vistage. And there's Entrepreneurs Organization and many others. Tab is another one.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
one of the things that I see as a speaker to these groups when I do workshops is these topics. People are like sponges. They want to learn more. Some know more than others, especially if they've been through a cycle or two. But most times we get one shot at this, right? What is this? What am I talking about? I'm talking about to build and sell. Many entrepreneurs are going to do this
Yes.
one time. So what happens
Yeah.
when we don't have that peer network anymore? You and I talked offline about the importance of peer-based advising, and I think you and I share the intention of helping business owners and meet them where they. So tell me a little bit about your experience and what you're curating for people to help them kind of envision
Mhm.
this whole life perspective.
Well, I sure join you as a fan of what peer-based advising offers. And it's such a shame the number of business leaders that think I don't need this, or I can't get enough from people, because they don't know my situation. That's just a mess of gas because it doesn't work. People should not be isolated. They need to see perspectives, even ones they disagree with profoundly, in order to sharpen themselves. So I've loved building these teams, and I helped build some in the Milwaukee area where actually Vistage got started many years ago, and I have been privileged to train a lot of people who run these kinds of groups and help them launch. And it's I can't think of anything that delivers more value for the dollar when you've got a well-run peer-based advisory team. What we notice is about, let's just say, 7 to 10 years in, particularly in a very healthy team, people who've been a part of it, benefited from it, contributed from it. If they're arriving at this event, a value event where what they have loved is now going to go into the hands of others, they tend to get into a new place of isolation. They're looking around the table. There's nobody here who's lived that yet. How can I explain what I'm facing? There's not going to be somebody who has, they might have ideas, but they're not going to have it from a life experience. They might have observed it happening elsewhere, but they have not personally lived it. Like, this is my estate, this is my dream, this is my identity, and it's going to be in somebody else's hands. How do I face that? So people who stay in those groups at that time tend to turn into like a wise owl presence where they, are giving back to others, but they're not really bringing their biggest problems anymore or biggest opportunities. And so others just leave and just get into that spot where they don't have a community around them anymore. As COVID broke open, it gave me a chance to do some research with an idea that I had been niggling in the back of my mind, having watched this happen in places like YPO and Vistage and Convene and C12 and Tab and stuff done by community colleges for peer-based groups. And we discovered that what I was just describing is true, that this is about when people leave and they are isolated, and they're also unicorns because they've differentiated themselves. They've had a long life. There probably isn't someone who's exactly like them. But it began to be, what if we gathered them together at this point and gave them a very kind of structured map for 3+ years to work at these issues in front of some others who are working at their issues? And man, have we had fun. We've already developed 6 cohorts. We're working on our next one right now and recruiting it, and watching them learn and help each other along and be in a spot where there's no pressure to have the answers, but to bring their questions and to wrestle with it together. It's just been so
That's
rich.
awesome. I love that. That's amazing, and we should definitely talk more about that off air, because I think that's a fascinating transition, particularly for for me. And when I work with clients pre M&A, and then I help them with transition and the transaction. So the M&A transaction itself, and when they sell. And for some folks, they'll stay in Vistage a little longer. My experience in YPO was after the exit I went through as an executive. I was out of YPO, and
Yeah.
it was horrible because it
Yep.
was exactly when I needed that group most, and I was out, and it felt really
Yeah.
lonely. So I can definitely
Yeah.
relate to that, and I can see the value. So I love hearing about that. In your experience, Mark, what are you seeing as some of the biggest challenges facing business owners today related to succession?
There's one that I just keeps showing up, and then there's a second one I would point to. The second one used to be the thing that was showing up the most, and I'm troubled that it isn't. So the first one, the one that's showing up a lot right now, is that people are not coming into their roles as entry level employees or into leadership roles, high end leadership roles, with a strong character formation and a strong formation around how they will deal with people, and the emotional intelligence is one of those aspects. So they're not really equipped. The school and the family, religious organizations, civic organizations aren't participated in the way that they were. There's not a consistent formation of people in those places. And so, what the business needs for people who are willing to be transparent and show their work and help build each other's up, they're having to form that in their workplace. And many businesses aren't prepared for that. They don't have 2 and 3 year onboarding processes. They have, here's the book, here's the manual, get started, work at this for 30 minutes a day for 3 months, and we'll check in on you. But to get into some kind of group like the Northern Europeans used to do with their build on groups, like, we're coming in from the fields on Saturday night, we're going to teach each other to read. We don't do those kinds of things at work. And the organizations that are saying, hey, we're going to have an in-house university, they're already getting ahead of that trend. They have to do it. They're seeing it. They're making that happen. I see that over and over. The second one is what we might call kind of seeing life through a monocle, like, or a telescope, one lens, which is what I know. I know this software. I know this process. I know these two disciplines, and the whole world is a nail for what I know. And if it doesn't satisfy, I shut down. I have nothing to offer. I quit. I say it's somebody else's fault, or you didn't teach me to do this. And so we see complex problem solving really not being present in the workplace in the way it needs to be. And when that shows up in the C suite, you have people who can't figure out marketplace facing solutions to big complex dilemmas. it used to be that that was something that people would bring me in to say, we got to figure this out. That's happening less and less because we're starting to now just settle into the fact that everybody has their discipline and somehow the solution should just show up. One example of this is the number of, they're often manufacturers that I've worked with where they've given up trying to find engineers to do large scale problem solving. They're hiring physicists because they're the ones who seem to be coming out of their graduate work usually with training to do complex matters. Whereas a lot of entry level type engineers are coming in, they were trained on a couple of types of software. And if the problem doesn't fit the software, they don't know what to do.
It is a complex thing. Are you recommending any particular course of action to address these challenges?
There are a couple of things that I do recommend pretty regularly, but I don't like to say, well, here's what you should do. I want them to talk about what do you want to do? What are you willing to do? What are you going to throw at this? Do you want to bring this in house or do you want to sign up with an organization? What will you own so you'll actually act on this? And out of that, some of those things emerge. But what I like to make sure is in place is some kind of EQ development for sure. That the ability to read the room and know the people that you're in, so it's not just knowing myself, it's my ability to read the signals of other people and to have awareness so that we don't have to have a meeting 3 times in order to solve something. We can take care of it when we gather the first time. It's such an expensive leak of time and money to have to meet a second time. So EQ, I want in there somewhere. And I really like to see organizations build their development training up in whatever form to where it's a partnership with the person. So it's not just here's what we want to teach you. That needs to be there. Somewhere in there, though, for employee retention, especially key employees, that employee has to be able to say, here's where I want my life to go. And it needs to match up with, well, here's a pathway we see for you. Now, what's this uniquely crafted set of steps for you? When those are in place, you will have people who will be very loyal, stay a long time, and help to lift up others as opposed to, I want your job someday. Get out of my way.
Absolutely. I like that you give the approach of helping people figure out what it is that they want and not just prescribing the answer. Mark, we have covered a lot of ground today. If there are 2 to 3 things that you might suggest, not prescribe, but suggest as takeaways from today's episode, what would they be?
I think we've been pretty strong on pointing out the benefit of peer-based advising and not going alone. That helps people do their career for 30 or 40 years, not 4 years times 10, circling around, cycling around, burning out, and restarting elsewhere or all over again. So peer-based advising is just something to figure out where you should land and assume that you should do it. There is a strong benefit from having a thought partner, someone who has your back and is with you and doesn't need something from you. Sometimes this is a friend. Sometimes this is a group of people who just agree to meet regularly. Sometimes it's a paid executive advisor, but something where you know you can close the door, things are going to be held in confidence, and you can emote. And it's not going to show up somewhere else. And you can wrestle and you can admit that you're helpless and you can be vulnerable and it's just safe so that you can find a way forward. I think those are 2 very important items. If I added a third one, it would start to go down this, how are you going to develop others? You can't delay that anymore.
No, you can't. And businesses that have that owner dependency, they're not independent from them, whether it's because of their identity or or the role they're playing. Those businesses are going to have a tougher time transitioning. So it's a full circle, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
It really is. If there's anything I didn't ask you today, Mark, that you wanted to share, anything special you want to make sure we cover?
I think I came to this aware of what you are doing and what you want to do with your audience. And so the main thing I want to make sure is that it lands with the audience and they know that if they're paying attention to what you're bringing and doing and who you're inviting to have conversation with them, they're in a good place. And I would invite them to drink very, very deeply of what you bring to their world. Again, our competition for this stuff is loss of value. It is a broken dream. And we want to help people be able to be confident as they take their next steps.
That's special. Thank you for sharing that. And I do ask many times on this show if people have a favorite quote. Is there something that inspires you?
Earlier in this podcast, if somebody rewound it and listened through it, they'd find where I almost said it not long ago because of where this conversation went. I do not remember where I first heard this, and I wish I could attribute it to someone. So I'll say this belongs to the community around the world of process consultants that I have been privileged to know and walk beside. They would say it like this: firm with process and soft with people.
Firm with process and soft with people. What if we threw that in Chat GPT? Maybe we can find the origin. Maybe you're the
Maybe.
origin now because you've said
Who
it on this
knows?
show and
That's
it's going to reach millions and millions of people. You are now the owner of that
I
quote.
will
So
make that
congratulations.
I'll take that assignment, and you can too, and see what happens. Yeah.
We can take that assignment. That's amazing. Mark, I think there's going to be lots of people who want to understand more about what you're doing. What's a good way for them to reach out to you?
Well, we were fortunate here not too long ago just to get a URL tied to my name and point it to where I wanted it. So marklvincent.com, you'll come to a link tree page that has, like 10 or 11 gateways to some of the kinds of resources that we've talked about today. And I'm happy to engage with anyone who wants to have more conversation.
And we'll also have links to those sites in our show notes, Mark. So thanks so much for that. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for joining me on Succession Stories. It's been an absolute pleasure to get to know you and build a relationship with you. And I definitely look forward to staying in touch.
Well, and I wish you every success.
Thank you so much. And to our listeners, thank you for listening. Thanks for tuning into Succession Stories. Why not hit that follow button, like and subscribe? You can get our show wherever you listen to podcasts. And you can also find us on YouTube and get the full videos and all our video shorts from Succession Stories and our sister show, The Entrepreneur Gene. This has been another wonderful episode. Thanks again to my guest, and we'll see you next time on Succession Stories.